everyone, it's Katrina. If you're a fan of history, mystery, and discoveries, you are in the right place. There is something undeniably unsettling about things hidden beneath a blanket of ice. Frozen for millennia, these icy tombs hold secrets, some beautiful, some downright terrifying. Today we are venturing into the unknown, dissecting the chilling phenomenon of mysterious things found in the ice. So grab your parka and some hot tea and let's go.
The time the U.S. Army built an ice fortress.
How would you feel about living underneath the ice in hollow tunnels? What about if the lights above your head are powered by a portable nuclear reactor? Sounds kind of scary and crazy, doesn't it? If it had been up to the U.S. military, hundreds of scientists and soldiers would have been living in a situation just like that, right now.
They would have gotten away with it too if it hadn't been for that pesky ice. Before I get to the ice fortress, have you ever heard of Project Iceworm? It was a top-secret program undertaken by the United States Army during the Cold War. The main objective of Project Iceworm was to establish a hidden network of launch sites for nuclear missiles underneath the Greenland ice sheet. These launch sites would be able to house and fire nuclear missiles towards the Soviet Union in the event of nuclear war. The project was highly classified to maintain secrecy from the Soviets. The launch sites would be virtually undetectable and offer an element of surprise in a potential conflict. Okay, all caught up. In June of 1959, construction began on Camp Century. The U.S. Army had publicly announced the establishment, portraying it as a scientific research station dedicated to studying various aspects of living and working in an ice-cap environment. Sounds boring and scientific, right? No secrets here. There were going to be over 2 miles of tunnels dug into the Greenland ice, 800 miles from the North Pole.
I know 800 miles seems pretty far, but not when you're dealing with the North Pole. To put things into perspective, New York City is about 3,400 miles from the North Pole.
The U.S. military began building Camp Century close to the already established Thule Air Base in Greenland. This made it easier for construction materials and equipment to be delivered by airplane. All the equipment was loaded onto heavy track vehicles and then driven 100 miles out to the site. It was a long drive, considering the vehicles could only move about 2 miles per hour. How do you go about building an underground ice base? Follow these instructions and you'll be there in no time. The U.S. Army engineers started with snow plows. They plowed massive trenches in the ice. The one they dubbed Main Street was over 1,000 feet long. Then, with the trenches dug, they installed steel arches and covered them back over with snow. With the tunnels established, it was only a matter of expanding the camp inward. They dug more tunnels and brought in prefabricated buildings. By the time all was said and done, they had erected sleeping quarters, a hospital, a laundromat, scientific labs, and even a barber shop. To bring power to the dark, icy corridors, the Army shipped in a portable nuclear reactor. This thing weighed a whopping 330 tons. It took 70 hours to drive it to the site. At first, things seemed like they might be okay. Scientists drilled ice core samples that are still valuable scientific assets today. But Project Iceworm wasn't just about science, as we learned. They mostly wanted a place to deploy ballistic missiles without detection. The plan, which was not known to the public at the time, was to have 600 nuclear missiles ready to launch at the drop of a hat. The end goal was to have 52,000 square miles of tunnels and 11,000 full-time personnel. The facility would have been 3 times bigger than Denmark.
The grand plan was abandoned in 1963. There were 2 major problems. The first one was the Danish government, who refused to allow nuclear weapons on their soil.
Then there was the ice itself, which wouldn't sit still. It was so annoying for the military. The ice kept shifting, and scientists warned of imminent collapse. Many of the tunnels did collapse after the last soldiers left in 1966.
These days, Camp Century is once more buried beneath the ice. The U.S. Army left behind about 47,000 gallons of radioactive waste. As warming temperatures in Greenland melt the ice above the collapsed tunnels, the radioactive waste is closer than ever to escaping.
The ghost ship of the Arctic.
The SS Beichimo spent 38 years as a ghost ship, haunting the icy channels of the Arctic. This is the ship's tragic and sometimes spooky story. It all started in 1914 with the First World War. The ship began operations under the name Anger Manilfen, which takes a real German to pronounce properly.
The ship was more than 200 feet long, equipped with a strong steam engine and a sturdy steel hull. Mostly, the ship was a trading vessel. It transported goods between Sweden and Germany. When Germany lost the war, it was taken by the British. The first thing they had to do was get rid of that long German name. When World War I was over, the Germans were not very popular. They wouldn't be popular again for a very long time.
In the 1920s, Canada's Hudson Bay Company purchased the ship for about $18,000. Inflation is really out of control, isn't it? You used to be able to buy a whole cargo ship for less than a modern car.
The Canadian company kept the ship working in the far north. It sailed from Scotland to Siberia, through Alaska, into the Yukon, and across the Northwest Territories. It also went far south to the Panama Canal, where the crew got to enjoy a bit of a break in the warm sun.
I know what you're thinking. Let's speed things up to the haunting.
In 1931, the SS Bay Chimo got trapped in the ice. It was something that could happen now and again, but the ship was really stuck this time. Most of the crew fled to the nearby town of Barrow, leaving behind only 15 men. They were hoping to salvage the ship's cargo, an estimated $58,000 worth of fur. The single load of fur was worth 3 times as much as the boat. Things were looking dire. The remaining crew would be forced to spend the winter stuck on the ice-locked boat, guarding the precious cargo. But then, something really weird happened. The crew had built a shelter near the ship where they were keeping the furs in a big pile. On November 24th, they were hit by a blizzard. When the snow finally stopped, the vessel was gone. The crew thought it sank, though they couldn't figure out how. The ice hadn't broken. If it had, the crew and their camp would have sunk. The ship just sort of went away. For years, the SS Bay Chimo sailed aimlessly through the Arctic. The ship was spotted in 1933, 34, 35, and then 39. Then once more in 1969. It miraculously survived without a single crew member for almost 40 years.
And hey, it could still be out there right now, somehow avoiding detection. The Alaskan government tried to find the ship in 2006 to no avail. There are an estimated 4,000 boats just like this one off the coast of Alaska. Ghost vessels that disappeared and have never been seen again. It's shout-out time! I want to give a huge shout-out to Holly Titor and Kyle Brown for supporting this channel. Thanks so much for watching and spending time with us. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like this.
Where did this artifact come from?
Archaeologists in Alaska discovered a small piece of broken bronze metal with some leather attached to it. The bizarre artifact came as a big surprise to John Hofecker from the University of Colorado. Let's see if you can figure out what the artifact is before I tell you.
The mysterious piece of metal is at least 1,500 years old. It's not very big, small enough to easily hold in your hand. It was discovered inside an Inupiat dwelling at Cape Espenberg, not far from the Bering Strait. The dwelling is about 1,000 years old. It was built by ancient people who thrived in one of the iciest and most inhospitable landscapes in the world. The Inupiat depended on the sea ice itself for survival. They hunted marine creatures and land mammals. They also fished and gathered berries. They were apex hunter-gatherers.
The Inupiat ancestors date back to the earliest human beings in North America. These days, their descendants are still living on St. Lawrence Island and the Seward Peninsula. They were the first people to make contact with European explorers in Alaska.
What's amazing is that the Inupiat used to live all the way from Russia to Greenland. That is a huge part of the map. They didn't build massive cities of stone like the Mesopotamians, but they did spread across the icy wasteland of the north, through Alaska and northern Canada. Regional differences did develop, but they largely kept the same language. Some languages can still be understood by groups in Alaska and groups thousands of miles away in Greenland. According to John Hofecker, the newly found object didn't originate in Alaska. The Inupiat of Alaska didn't possess the skill of bronze metallurgy, but their friends in southern Siberia did.
Okay, but what is this tiny metal artifact? Do you have any good guesses yet? Be sure to let me know in the comments, but keep in mind that even John and Owen don't know what it is. It kind of looks like a buckle, but there's no way of telling. Owen Mason from the University of Alaska speculated the Inupiat traded Alaskan walrus ivory for bronze technology from the Siberians across the Bering Strait. See, the world was way more connected in ancient times than we thought.
The meteorites hidden below Antarctica.
There are thousands of meteorites hidden underneath the Antarctic ice. These meteorites could contain the secrets of the cosmos. Their chemical composition could give scientists clues as to the origins of human evolution. Unfortunately, the meteorites are sinking. Wait, sinking? How can meteorites be sinking if they are stuck in the Antarctic ice?
The thing is, Antarctica is getting warm. Very, very warm. As it continues to heat up, the ice continues to melt. And as the ice melts, meteorites that used to be firmly stuck are slipping from their icy prisons and sinking deeper. Meteorites that sink may never see the light of day again. How many meteorites do you think are on Antarctica? A new study has suggested there are more than 850,000 of them. Those are the ones either on the surface or just below it.
Take a look at this image thanks to Jose Jorquera from the University of Santiago. Those aren't normal rocks scattered over the ice. Those are rocks from outer space.
For millions of years, Antarctica has been mercilessly bombarded by meteorites from space. Sometimes they sink so deep that they are lost, never to be seen again. But sometimes they land in what's known as a blue ice area. There are about 600 blue ice areas in Antarctica, covering roughly 1% of the continent's surface. These areas are awesome because the meteorites are lying on the surface. They hit the hard ice and stay there. Black chunks of rock on an otherwise pale surface. Scientists can walk around with a bucket and pick up meteorites like they're hunting for Easter eggs, maybe even easier. 50,000 meteorites have been recovered from Antarctica, making up more than 60% of the global meteorite collection. Almost all of them come from blue ice areas. And remember, those areas are only 1% of the continent. The sheer number of meteorites stuck in Antarctica's ice is staggering. Some of them could have frozen microbial life forms from another galaxy. Some of them could contain the building blocks of life, proving the theory of panspermia. Panspermia says all life originates from the stars and falls to planets on meteorites.
Because meteorites are dark, they soak up the sunlight. When they soak up sunlight, they melt the ice around them and slowly sink, like somebody caught in quicksand. Scientists are hoping they can collect more meteorites before they all sink too deep and take their secrets with them. How would you like to go on a meteorite hunting expedition to Antarctica?
The Ice Age cometh.
The Bible says a catastrophic flood covered the earth. The story is repeated by cultures around the world. Indigenous groups in North America spoke of a great flood. The Mesopotamian story, known as the Epic of Gilgamesh, also included an apocalyptic flood. It's in Greek myth, Chinese legend. The flood is everywhere.
You might be surprised to learn a cataclysmic event 13,000 years ago could have caused a real-life flood to sweep across the world. As the Ice Age ended, there was an extreme cooling event that briefly gripped the planet in an icy fist. When this unexpected period of icy horror ended, scientists think the melting glaciers caused the actual flood from the Bible. It's called the Younger Dryas event. It's something everyone should know about because there is always a possibility that something similar could happen during our lifetimes. My lifetime or your lifetime, it could start happening tomorrow.
It began around 10,900 BC. This was right around the time Göbekli Tepe was built in Turkey. If you haven't heard of Göbekli Tepe before, you need to watch more videos from this channel.
The Ice Age had already ended. The temperature had been rising steadily for more than 6,000 years. The temperature was going up and up, transforming the planet. Just when things were starting to get tropical, the temperature plummeted again. The glaciers that had been retreating suddenly started advancing. If there was an advanced civilization in the world at this time, it would have been covered in ice. The cold snap lasted about 1,000 years, and then things went back to normal. It was an anomaly of devastating proportions. What's crazy is that scientists believe it was caused by too much heat. One of the prevailing theories is that when the Ice Age ended, tons of cold, fresh water was dumped into the Atlantic Ocean. Oceanic circulation patterns were disrupted. The disruption made it impossible for hot air to circulate, ushering in an aggressive cooling event. What I just described is almost identical to what is happening right now in the Gulf Stream.
Basically, global warming caused global cooling. Then, when the ice melted at the end of the Younger Dryas, after it had already melted at the end of the Ice Age, there may have been a flood. The influx of water could have been enough to wash away human civilizations. This flood could have been what inspired the biblical tale of Noah and his ark.
Alien structures in Antarctica. Another so-called alien outpost has been discovered in Antarctica. That's the news according to a tenacious UFO researcher who has been scanning Antarctica using satellite photos on Google Earth. Their claim is that the pixelated photos of ice floes, ice fields, and ice mountains, there are glimpses of flying spaceships and Martian structures. The UFO researcher is Scott Waring, someone who has made a lot of outrageous claims about the frozen continent. One of his more recent discoveries is that of a humongous underwater base about 100 miles from the coast of Antarctica. It's not technically on the continent, but submerged just beside it. What's amazing is that you can see the sunken base for yourself on Google Maps. There are enormous structures on the sea floor, so big that they appear in the satellite images of the water's surface. Waring pointed out large square buildings that look like vehicle hangars, perhaps to hold spacecraft or terrestrial machines. But are these really buildings left behind by extraterrestrials? Or are they natural features that sort of look like what you'd imagine an underwater alien base to look like? It reminds me of the ice pyramid everyone has been talking about lately. Maybe you've heard of it. Here is a shot from Google Earth showing the pyramid that has everyone so hot and bothered. Scientists are saying it's a mountain. Others are saying it's a pyramid. Nobody can agree. And because the mystery structure is in Antarctica, it's been impossible to investigate up close and personal. Is it made from shaped stone or from natural rock? Geologist Dr. Mitch Darcy from the German Research Center for Geosciences said the pyramid-shaped structure is located in the Ellsworth Mountains. Mitch also said that the mountains are perfectly natural. The Ellsworth peaks jut out from above a thick glacier, with lots of them kind of shaped like pyramids. Mitch said it's not a complicated shape to arise in nature. Mountains frequently look like pyramids. There's even a name for this kind of natural structure, a nunatak. Mitch Darcy is convinced it's just a mountain, not a piece of architecture left behind by an ancient civilization. There are others who are convinced there is some spooky stuff going on in Antarctica, like Eric Hecker, who said the U.S. Amundsen Scott South Pole Station is being used as an air traffic control hub for aliens. What do you think is going on in Antarctica? The Arctic Stump. A tree stump has been found in the Arctic tundra that could reveal amazing secrets of the ancient world. Yes, a tree stump. One that was found by a hunting party in one of the coldest places you've never heard of. The hunters who found the tree stump were shocked. They had set out from Cambridge Bay and Nunavut, one of the most isolated places in Canada, and seriously cold. Tree stumps are not the kinds of things you see in this white desert. The Arctic tundra isn't like other frozen places in the world. It's so cold that trees don't even grow. Trees grow throughout Alaska, northern Canada, and Siberia, but Cambridge Bay is in the legitimate Arctic, about 600 kilometers above the tree line. Even with no trees, the land is populated by caribou and other snowy creatures. As the hunters went through the frozen bogs of the hilly terrain looking for caribou, they came across what they first mistook for a cylindrical rock. But nope, it was a fossilized tree stump. The hunters were in shock. Very few pieces of wood have ever been recovered from this high up in the Arctic. They took photos of the tree stump like they had just spotted Bigfoot. The hunters also wrote down its GPS location so that they could tell scientists about it. The tree trunk could be up to 45 million years old. The Arctic is treeless today, but that wasn't always the case. Axel Heiberg Island, Violet Island, Ellesmere Island, and Nunavut's other frozen blocks of land used to be covered in forest. Scientists are now trying to figure out where the piece of wood came from. Robert Blanchette from the University of Minnesota is on the case. He is a plant pathology professor who studied another piece of mummified wood found even farther north a decade ago. Robert said this stump could be a piece of driftwood from prehistoric days. The only thing that's for sure is that it was part of an ancient forest. Studying it could reveal more about what the Arctic looked like before eternal winter froze everything solid. The king bear of Alaska. In 2014, the skull of a very real monster was discovered at an archaeological site in Alaska, not far from Utqiagvik. Experts were blown away because this skull looks like it should belong to a polar bear, but it's too big. It might be the preserved skull of a legendary beast spoken of in ancient Inuit mythology. The Inuit call the monster King Bear. Inuit hunters know more about polar bears than anybody else in the world. They have spent over 10,000 years living in the icy wilderness of the far north alongside polar bears. They have fought polar bears, they've been eaten by polar bears. The big, fluffy white bears are as common to them as stray cats are to us. That's why their legends should be taken seriously. The Inuit tell stories of a unique polar bear that their hunters feared more than any other creature. The hunters called it Tiriarnak. In English, it means king bear. If the stories are to be believed, king bears were very fast. I mean panther fast, moving like unstoppable demons. They also looked a little different when compared to normal polar bears. They were far bigger and had narrower bodies. Scientists and animal experts assumed the Inuit were making this up. They thought they were telling tall tales. Then archaeologists found the skull of one freakishly big polar bear in 2014. The skull seems to suggest the Inuit aren't just telling campfire stories. King Bear is real and was humongous. Take a look at this picture from UIC Science. The potential King Bear skull is on the left, next to the skulls of average polar bears. It's significantly bigger. There likely aren't any king bears left today. When scientists dated the skull, they found it to be about 1,200 years old. Seeing as modern polar bears are slipping closer to extinction, it's no surprise a bigger predator has already disappeared. Ann Jensen, the leader of the excavation, said king bear could have been a rare subspecies. Either that, or an entirely new species that scientists don't even know about. World's End. Bouvet Island is one of the most isolated and forsaken islands in the world. It's little more than a chunk of ice in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, 1,600 miles from civilization. There is nobody living on the island. It's covered in a perpetual sheet of ice, but partially frozen on its surface is a random boat. How did a boat end up on the island? It's a question that scientists have been trying to answer for years. The island is located between Argentina and South Africa, slightly north of Antarctica. Some think it's the most isolated piece of land on the planet. Norway has claimed it for themselves, despite the island being nowhere near Norway. They made it into an uninhabited nature preserve. Even if no nation had claimed this island, people aren't exactly lining up to live here. I don't even know how you would get to the island short of hiring a boat or jumping out of a plane on your way to Australia. Bouvet Island is so remote that after it was discovered in 1739, it was lost until 1808. Then nobody visited the island again until 1964. That was when Alan Crawford and a team of scientists went to investigate volcanic activity. They sailed there aboard the Royal Navy's Antarctic ice vessel HMS Protector. Alan and his colleagues took a helicopter from their ship to the island, and there, stuck in the ice, was an abandoned lifeboat. Alan couldn't believe his eyes. Somebody had paddled out to this island and left their small, flimsy lifeboat moored in a lagoon of ice. There was no motor, there was no indication of how long the boat had been stuck on the island, and there weren't even any sails. The only things Alan found were a couple of oars nearby and a flattened copper tank. When he and his team explored the island, they found no trace of human life. If you think it's already weird, just wait until you hear this next part. There was another expedition to the island a few years later. Scientists were excited to see the legendary abandoned lifeboat, but when they got there, it was gone. The boat couldn't have just gotten up and left, didn't have any legs. It also more than likely didn't get pushed away by the wind, considering it was pretty far inland. The way things looked, it seemed like whoever took the boat to the island had left on it. The scientific team was left disappointed and with too many unanswered questions. Had somebody been on the island when Alan was there? Where could they have hidden? And why couldn't they have made themselves known so that they could be rescued? Is there somebody paddling around the Atlantic Ocean in a flimsy lifeboat for fun? There are no answers to these questions. Maybe the boat sank into the ice and is still buried on the island. And maybe this is just one of those mysteries that isn't supposed to be solved. If you have any theories about what happened to the lifeboat, be sure to let me know in the comments. The Svalbard whaler graves. One of the loneliest and most depressing places in the world is a whaler graveyard in Svalbard, Norway. The remains of wooden coffins and gravestones dot the frozen landscape, marking the places where ancient Norwegian whale hunters were buried. I'd like to tell you a story now, but it's not a story for everyone. You'll hear of a cruel industry, a war between humans and whales, and of battles between grizzled seamen. On July 29, 1693, a massive fleet of Dutch and Danish whaling ships assembled off the edge of the Svalbard archipelago. Since the beginning of the 17th century, the Dutch and the Danes had been hard at work eradicating whales from the ocean. They left their homes and prowled the Arctic seas, hunting bowhead whales. In the beginning, the whalers built barracks and storehouses on Arctic islands where they could process the whales for blubber and oil. But as whale numbers started to drop, the whales stopped going near land. Whalers began processing their kills on their ships. In the summer of 1693, the Dutch and Danish ships had their holds filled with whale oil. They were anchored off the archipelago waiting to return home. The issue was that the sea ice was too thick. They couldn't get back home to unload their very valuable cargo. The reason the ships waited together in a fleet was they sought safety in numbers. At the time, France was at war with the Netherlands. The whalers were concerned that the French Navy would attack them. Their concerns were justified. Unbeknownst to the whalers, who were a bunch of sitting ducks trapped in the ice, King Louis XIV had dispatched a fleet of warships to sink them. It was a perfect storm of terror. Just as the whaling vessels prepared to leave, the French fleet of warships arrived. Every last whaling vessel was burned and sunk, with the whalers mostly killed or captured. Only a handful of whalers escaped. They were left in the harsh Arctic all alone with no one to save them. They had to bury their dead in the ground, still mostly frozen. Those burials are still in Svalbard today, a grim reminder of that violent episode in whaling history. They aren't the only burials either. At the end of every summer, when whaling crews arrived at the fjord, they used to work together to bury their friends who had died while at sea. The biggest graveyard is on Outer Norway Island. There is another huge cemetery at a place called Corpse Point. It doesn't get much more gruesome than that. By the end of the 18th century, whalers would go a whole season without seeing a single whale. Bowhead whales fell into a death spiral, and today their numbers remain dangerously low. By the way, Norway still hunts whales, but only minke whales. They kill about 500 whales per year. All that remains of the whalers of old are their ancient moss-covered gravestones still chilled by permafrost, and their creepy abandoned processing stations. The Lost Ice Road of Siberia. Archaeologists have found evidence of a great ice road used by merchants in Siberia 8,000 years ago. It's a discovery so breathtaking, I can barely believe it's real. According to scientist Yaroslav Kuzmin, the road is 1,240 miles long. It's been dubbed the Great Ice Road and was 4 times as long as the Silk Road that ran through Central Asia. It's also twice as old as the Egyptian pyramids. But who traveled this road, and what was the point? The road winds through Siberia from Lake Krasnoye near the Bering Sea to Zhukov Island in the Arctic North. The route isn't straight though, as it bends deep into Siberian territory before shooting upward into the forbidden icy wasteland. You might be wondering how the road reached an island. It's a good thing to wonder. The answer is that Zhukov Island used to be connected to the Siberian mainland. Siberia has sort of shrunk in the last 8,000 years, with huge parts of its northern lands disappearing underwater. What the merchants were trading was volcanic glass known as obsidian. It even came in 2 colors, either black or volcanic green. This igneous rock was a very important material for prehistoric people when it came to making things like weapons and tools. 79 obsidian tools were found on Zokov Island, but there is no local spot to mine obsidian. Scientists were able to trace the material back to Lake Krasnoye. The only way it could have reached the island was on a long trading network. The scope of this trading network is dizzying. People were mining obsidian near the lake and then shipping it north using dog sled teams. That's the only explanation. They definitely weren't walking 1,200 miles through an inhospitable winter wonderland. Archaeologists even found proof of dog sleds being used on Zokov. In the same place they found the obsidian tools, archaeologists uncovered the oldest wooden sledge runners in the world. Dog sled technology has been the same in eastern Siberia and other parts of the Arctic since pretty much the Ice Age. Thanks for watching. How would you feel about living in an icy place like Antarctica or Siberia? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to hit that subscribe button before you leave and come back soon.
Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed.
Relics from World War I. Melting ice in the Italian Alps has revealed some very interesting relics from World War I. In a cave at the top of Mount Scorluzzo, 10,000 feet high, soldiers from the Austro-Hungarian army dug out some wooden barracks and fought against the Italians in what became known as the White War. 100 years later, the remains of the White War are finally being thawed from the ice. Archaeologists have begun to find frozen weapons, letters left behind by the soldiers, and even diaries perfectly preserved in the ice. In 2015, the ice that had sealed off the cave in Scorluzzo melted completely, making it easy for researchers to get inside. The shelter had been locked up when the war ended, and many things were left inside like a time capsule. What the soldiers left behind has given us a glimpse into just how harsh the conditions were for them as they braved freezing temperatures, starvation, and of course, enemy fire. Many died from hypothermia and avalanches. Even remains of the soldiers themselves have been found in the surrounding area as more and more ice and snow melts in the Italian Alps. Prehistoric viruses. Russian scientists have dug some pretty scary things out of the ice. They've discovered ancient mammoths, forgotten saber-toothed tigers, and now a whole host of prehistoric viruses that could kill us all. The Russian State Laboratory has launched research into prehistoric viruses, and they are using the remains of ancient animals to do so. Animals that they recover from melted permafrost are being shipped to a lab, then studied for research into virus evolution. The project was started by the University of Yakutsk when they analyzed tissue from a horse that died 4,500 years ago and was frozen over. Now they are moving on to mammoths, dogs, rodents, and anything else that might carry viruses. The laboratory claims that they are only conducting studies on prehistoric paleoviruses, but there is no way to know what's really happening. I mean, they might not even know what they've found. This same lab happens to be one of the only 2 places in the world known to actually store the smallpox virus. Why? Who knows? Hopefully they don't want to use it. A UFO in the snow. According to what's been found on satellite images of our southernmost continent, a UFO has reportedly been discovered in Antarctica. As the coldest and most barren place on the planet, it does kind of make sense that a UFO would choose to land there if they wish to remain undiscovered. Someone was looking at satellite maps of the continent when they apparently uncovered what they claim is a UFO and sent the discovery to YouTuber Mr. MBB333, who shared it in a video. Unfortunately, what the supposed aliens probably didn't anticipate was that the melting polar ice caps would cause their camouflage to melt away. This seems to be the case here, as newly melted ice has revealed a massive metallic disc over 60 feet wide in the middle of an otherwise empty wasteland. Of course, this could be a doctored video, so take everything with a grain of salt. However, this news spread so much that the History Channel even talked about it on YouTube. What happened to Nazi Week over there? Now it's always Alien Week. Speaking reasonably, it is of course impossible to say with complete certainty that a UFO landed in Antarctica. All we have to go on are these satellite images that show what looks to be similar to a spaceship. There is an elevated circle on the top of the metallic structure, a large shadow being cast from it, and a small patch of dry land that was, until very recently, ice. You could see why people think it might be alien, but what kind of object do you think it could be? Let me know in the comments. This discovery made by satellite has led to more questions than answers, but regardless, seems like people are definitely paying more attention to Antarctica. Frozen cell phone. A pair of hikers were recently saved thanks to a miraculous discovery in the ice. It all went down at the end of December 2021. Matthew and his friend Dewson had gone hiking near Mount Baldy in California, up the Ice House Saddle. Matthew lost his footing on the icy trail and started to slide. Reacting on instinct, his friend reached out to grab him, but it was a big mistake. Grabbing his friend cost Dewson his own footing, and they both tumbled down 150 feet of hard ice and snow. The only reason Matthew stopped at all was that he slammed into a tree. He ended up being terribly injured on the side of the mountain with mangled limbs and no way to call for help. Still, the guys weren't going to give up. Matthew picked up a stick to help himself walk and ended up accidentally jabbing something frozen in the snow. It was a cell phone. When he picked the thing up, it had a 1% battery charge, so he quickly dialed 911, shouted his location into the phone, and help was on the way. Without discovering that phone in the ice, both of them very well could have died right there on the mountain. But now you're probably wondering how the phone got there in the first place. The thing is, 3 days earlier, another hiker had gotten into a similar situation. What's truly amazing is that hiking in that spot is rare. People almost always go to the more popular peak at Mount Baldy. Yet, just 3 days earlier, a different person also slid down the mountain following the same trail and lost his cell phone. Then Matthew and his friend fell down the same spot and found it. The frozen phone just so happened to still have any battery at all, just enough to call the police. Talk about a series of incredible coincidences. Frozen delivery. A ship in Russia brought to port a cargo of frozen vehicles. It happened on December 27, 2021. When the ship, the Sun Rio Ro-Ro cargo carrier, arrived at the Russian port city of Vladivostok, everything was covered in ice. The ship was blanketed in ice, and so was its cargo. The entire deck was like a skating rink, as if the ship had just come out of a refrigerator. But that does make sense, considering the temperature was around -4 degrees Fahrenheit. Even in such a frigid part of the world, the frozen ship was enough to draw a crowd. The workers on board the ship had the unfortunate task of unloading dozens of frozen vehicles, some of which had up to 6 inches of solid ice on their exteriors. A lot of the cars were even damaged because the ice was so thick and the air was so cold that the windows simply shattered. How did so much ice get on the cars? According to an official with the shipping unit, it's all because of waves. Extreme winds while the ship was en route caused waves to reach all the way into the cargo hold. Then, thanks to the humid sea wind and sub-zero temperatures, the water turned almost immediately into ice. The result was a whole lot of ruined cars. Tusk in the ice. Scientists recently made an amazing discovery from the Ice Age. In 2018, scientists found a woolly mammoth tusk in Alaska over 3 feet long. But that's only the beginning of the story. Researchers analyzed over 400,000 microscopic data points from the tusk by looking at isotopes, or tiny atoms. According to Matt Wooler from the University of Alaska, they were able to retrace the entire life of the extinct beast. They found that during its 28 years on Earth, it wandered across enough of the Alaskan wilderness to circle the planet 2 times. How they came to this conclusion is a little confusing. It's because each year the mammoth was alive, a new layer grew on its tusk. Think of it as similar to the way that a tree's lifetime can be examined via the rings inside. By looking at the isotopes in each layer of mammoth tusk, researchers created a map of where it had been. One of the most amazing parts of the discovery is that they found its movement shifted suddenly at the age of 15. Researchers believe that was when the mammoth was kicked out of its herd and forced to go off on its own. From there, it wandered around extensively, sometimes hundreds of miles over just a couple of months. But throughout its entire life,
It walked enough that it could have literally circumnavigated the globe twice. Deer in a pond. In Connecticut, firefighters arrived at a frozen pond to find something strange going on. According to the Walcott Police Department, a frantic animal control officer by the name Roz Nenninger had phoned the fire department for backup when he discovered a deer stranded on the ice of a frozen pond at the local gun club. The deer had wandered onto the lake, not realizing the danger, slipped on its long legs, and then found itself completely stuck and unable to leave. If no one had rescued it, the deer would have broken through the ice and frozen to death in the water beneath, or simply starved. Luckily, the fire department did an amazing job. A rescuer crawled onto the ice on his stomach, very slowly so as not to scare the deer or break the surface of the pond. He then attached a rope to the deer and slowly dragged it back to solid land. Once released, it pranced off into the nearby woods without so much as a thank you. It might want to stay away from the lake and the gun club. Mongolian artifacts. In the high mountains of Mongolia's Altai region, there once lived one of the oldest pastoral societies in the world. We only know about them because of a handful of random burials found in the frigid, windswept landscape and a small collection of stone ruins. Because they lived in the icy part of western Mongolia, very little evidence of these people remains today. Whatever artifacts they left behind ended up being covered in snow and ice and lost for thousands of years. But thankfully, at least for archaeologists, melting ice in the mountains is revealing more and more lost relics from over 1,500 years ago. For example, archaeologists recently discovered a piece of rope woven from animal hair. It was lying in a pile of rocks right at the edge of the retreating ice. It is unknown exactly what the artifact may have been used for. It's possible that it was part of a bridle or a harness, or it may have been used for stringing up captives. It's impossible to say, but it does reveal an ancient technique for rope manufacturing hundreds of years before the Great Mongol Empire. According to electron microscopy done by scientists, nomads used camel hair to make the rope. They also found collagen preserved with some ancient arrowheads that they pulled from the ice, showing that they used deer tissue to affix arrowheads to their shafts. Pretty creative. Antarctic rescue. A Chinese icebreaker that was supposed to help rescue people actually ended up getting stuck itself. They were trying to help the passengers on the Academic Shokalsky vessel when it got stuck in the Antarctic ice. It happened a few years ago in December, when the Russian boat became lodged by thick ice floes and had no way of escape. The Chinese ship, the Shui Long, came to its rescue and transferred 52 passengers by helicopter onto a third ship called the Aurora Australis. Then, when the Chinese ship tried to maneuver through the ice and leave, it found that it couldn't. Nobody was in any serious danger on the Chinese icebreaker, but it was a pretty complicated rescue mission. It was actually kind of ironic since the Shui Long was called in to smash a path through the ice so that the Russian vessel could get free. Then it got stuck itself. The Aurora Australis hung around in open water just in case the Chinese crew also needed rescuing. But stubbornly, they said they didn't need any help and remained trapped until they could free themselves. All 111 individuals on board decided to wait it out. Cave lion cub. Deep in the Siberian Arctic, the cub of a cave lion was discovered partially thawed. She had been asleep in the ice for 28,000 years. The ice had preserved her with such perfection that her golden fur was undamaged. Her teeth and soft tissue were still intact, and scientists even found her organs. In fact, her claws are still so sharp that she could do some real damage. She's being hailed as an unprecedented specimen, a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. Russian scientists nicknamed the Siberian cub Sparta. Had the cub not fallen victim to whatever killed it, she would have roamed across the Russian wilderness alongside her fellow big cats, giant woolly mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, and ferocious dire wolves. But that's not what happened. When she was only about a month old, something caused her to die. According to the Russian and Japanese scientists in charge of researching the lion cub, she probably got stuck in a mudslide or fell into a crack in the ice. They know this because she must have frozen almost immediately to be in the incredible state of preservation she is now. Cave lions were pretty similar to African lions except more prehistoric.
It's believed they adapted to life at high altitudes, growing a thick coat to keep out the cold. They were basically the woolly versions of savanna lions. Now, scientists are investigating to see if they can actually bring this ancient creature back to life. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time for more videos like these. Bye!